In the silence of the pediatric ICU, a man in a $3,000 Italian suit kneels before renowned doctors, his tears falling on shoes that cost more than many people's annual salary. Dr. Edward Richardson, owner of one of the largest hospital networks in the country, desperately begs for his only son's life. While just a few feet away, a humble woman in a cleaning uniform observes everything in silence, carrying in her heart ancestral knowledge that might be the only hope for that child. But will the pride of a powerful man allow him to accept help from someone he's always considered invisible? Mary Grace Washington wakes up every day at 4 in the morning in her simple house in South Chicago. At 52 years old, she carries in her calloused hands not only the responsibility of supporting 3 orphan grandchildren, but also an extraordinary gift inherited from her grandmother: deep knowledge about medicinal plants and their healing properties. During her 15 years as a janitor at St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Chicago, Mary has always worked in the shadows, invisible to the eyes of doctors and administrators, but observing everything with a sharp intelligence that few suspected existed. She knows every hallway, every room, every patient who passes through there, and more importantly, she recognizes in the symptoms of hospitalized children patterns that modern equipment sometimes cannot detect. Her memory is a living archive of cases, treatments, and most importantly, the natural recipes her grandmother taught her during childhood in rural Mississippi. On the other side of the social scale is Dr. Edward Richardson, a 60-year-old man who built his hospital empire through a combination of unbridled ambition and business coldness. Owner of 12 hospitals across the country, Edward has always seen medicine as a profitable business, where patients are numbers on spreadsheets and employees are disposable resources. Widowed for 5 years, he raised his son Gabriel, only 8 years old, with the help of expensive nannies and elite private schools, but always maintaining an emotional distance he considers necessary to not show weakness. Edward openly despises basic-level employees, especially janitors, who, in his view, are people without formal education and with nothing relevant to contribute to the hospital environment. His arrogance is legendary among employees, who fear and avoid him whenever possible. The third crucial character in this story is Dr. Richard Thompson, one of the most renowned pediatricians in the country and head of the medical team at St. Michael's Hospital. At 45 years old, Richard was once an idealistic doctor who believed in medicine as a vocation to save lives. But 15 years working under Edward Richardson's pressure transformed him into a cynical and disillusioned professional. He's still technically excellent, but lost his passion for the profession and became mechanical in his diagnoses, trusting only in exams and established medical protocols. Richard developed a toxic dependency relationship with his employer, simultaneously despising Edward's business methods, but being unable to confront him due to the high salaries and benefits he receives. His medical soul is dormant, waiting for something to awaken it again. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the perfect moment to hit the notification bell, because this story will touch your heart in a way you never imagined possible. Get ready for an emotional journey that will make you question everything about prejudice, humility, and the true value of people. The tragedy begins on a Tuesday morning, when Gabriel Richardson is rushed to the hospital with symptoms that initially seem like a common flu: high fever, body aches, and extreme weakness. Edward, accustomed to solving all problems with money and influence, immediately mobilizes the best available medical team and demands that his son be treated as absolute priority. Dr. Richard and his team perform a complete battery of tests: CT scans, MRIs, blood analyses, bacterial and viral cultures. All results come back inconclusive or within normal range, but Gabriel's condition continues deteriorating rapidly. Within 48 hours, the boy develops severe neurological complications, beginning to have seizures and periods of unconsciousness that leave the entire medical team perplexed. Mary Grace, during her cleaning routine in the pediatric hallways, discreetly observes the unusual movement of doctors and nurses around Gabriel's room. She recognizes the signs immediately: the tense posture of professionals, worried whispers, the constant coming and going of specialists. When she manages to briefly glimpse the boy through the half-open door, her heart tightens. The symptoms she observes are identical to those of a condition her grandmother used to treat in rural Mississippi, a rare disease that local doctors could never diagnose correctly, but that the right plants could cure completely. However, Mary knows her opinion won't be heard or taken seriously by anyone in that environment. As days pass, Edward's desperation grows exponentially. He hires specialists from other countries, brings experimental equipment, and offers absurd amounts to any doctor who can save his son. The cruel irony of the situation doesn't go unnoticed by Mary. The most powerful man in the hospital, who always had all the money in the world to solve any problem, now finds himself completely powerless before something his wealth cannot buy. Edward begins having outbursts of rage, screaming at doctors, threatening to fire people, and demanding miracles that modern medicine cannot deliver. His mask of business coldness begins to crack, revealing a desperate father who doesn't know how to deal with the possibility of losing the only person he truly loves in the world. Dr. Richard, under extreme pressure, convenes a medical board with the best specialists in the country. They spend 3 days analyzing every detail of the case, reviewing international medical literature, and consulting colleagues around the world. Nothing. The diagnosis remains a mystery, and the empirical treatment they're applying isn't having effect. Gabriel is losing weight rapidly. His vital functions are deteriorating, and doctors begin discreetly talking about palliative care. Richard feels professionally failed and begins questioning whether he still has competence to practice medicine. Edward's pressure becomes unbearable, with constant threats and public humiliations that destroy what little remained of the doctor's self-esteem. It's in this moment of absolute desperation that Mary Grace makes a decision that will change everything. During one of her lunch breaks, she seeks out Sister Catherine, the hospital chaplain, an elderly nun who has always treated her with respect and affection. Mary tells the religious woman about her observations of Gabriel's case and explains that she believes she knows what the boy's problem is. Sister Catherine, who knows and respects Mary's traditional knowledge, encourages her to try talking to the doctors, even knowing the difficulties she'll face. Mary decides she cannot remain silent while a child dies, regardless of who the father is or how she'll be received. Mary's first attempt is a complete disaster. She respectfully approaches a senior nurse and tries to explain her suspicions about Gabriel's case. The nurse reprimands her harshly, saying that janitors shouldn't meddle in medical matters and that she could be fired for interfering in patient treatment. Mary insists, explaining she has knowledge about medicinal plants, but is quickly dismissed and threatened with punishment if she returns to the subject. Discouraged but not defeated, Mary decides to try a different approach. The next day, she manages to approach Dr. Richard during a moment when he's alone, visibly exhausted after another sleepless night. With all possible humility and respect, Mary introduces herself and explains that she's worked at the hospital for 15 years and has observed Gabriel's case. She mentions that her grandmother was a respected healer in her community and that she inherited some knowledge about medicinal plants. Richard, initially irritated by the interruption, is about to dismiss her rudely when something in Mary's sincerity makes him hesitate. Maybe it's the desperation of having no more options. Or maybe it's a distant memory of when he still believed medicine could come from unexpected sources. But he decides to listen. Mary explains that Gabriel's symptoms are consistent with a condition her grandmother called waning moon fever, a rare disease that mainly affects children and is caused by a specific imbalance in the organism that conventional tests cannot detect. She describes in detail how the symptoms evolve and correctly predicts what the next stage of Gabriel's deterioration will be, information that impresses Richard. Mary then explains that there exists a specific natural treatment, a combination of 3 plants that, when prepared correctly, can completely reverse the condition. Richard finds himself torn between scientific hopelessness and a spark of curiosity about these ancestral knowledges he never studied in medical school. The conversation is brutally interrupted when Edward appears in the hallway and sees his janitor talking to his head physician. He explodes in fury, accusing Mary of wasting time with ignorant superstitions and threatening Richard with dismissal if he continues listening to this woman without education. Edward publicly humiliates Mary, calling her a desperate illiterate seeking attention, and ordering her to immediately return to her cleaning duties. He categorically prohibits any hospital employee from discussing his son's case with Mary and threatens to fire anyone who disobeys this order. Mary retreats in silence, but the determination in her eyes doesn't go unnoticed by Richard. Meanwhile, Gabriel's condition continues worsening. He develops respiratory complications and needs to be put on assisted ventilation. Edward is on the verge of a nervous breakdown, alternating between periods of uncontrollable rage and moments of absolute despair where he cries copiously beside his son's bed. All experimental treatments have failed, and doctors begin preparing Edward for the worst. The situation is so grave that Gabriel has only a few days to live if there isn't a drastic change in his condition. It's in this moment of absolute desperation that Richard makes a decision that defines his character. Remembering Mary's words and her accuracy in predicting the evolution of symptoms, he decides to seek her out secretly. He finds her in the cleaning supplies storage room, working silently despite all the humiliation she suffered. Richard apologizes for Edward's behavior and asks her to explain again about the possible treatment for Gabriel. Mary, seeing the sincerity in the doctor, decides to trust him completely. She explains that the plants necessary for the treatment aren't easily found in the city, but that she knows a medicinal herb supplier at the Maxwell Street Market who can get the correct ingredients. The plants are wild mint leaves to cleanse the organism, echinacea root to strengthen the immune system, and elderflower to balance the nervous system. More important than the ingredients, Mary explains, is the preparation method. The plants must be harvested during a waxing moon, naturally dried, and prepared in a specific sequence her grandmother taught her. Richard offers to buy the ingredients, but Mary insists on going personally to ensure the quality and authenticity of the plants. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to leave your like so more people can know this incredible lesson about humility and the true value of people. The most emotional part is still to come. The following Saturday, Mary uses her day off to go to Maxwell Street Market, accompanied by Richard, who disguises himself as a regular customer to avoid calling attention. They visit several herb stalls until they find old Benjamin, a 70-year-old African-American man who is respected in the community as someone who knows the right plants. When Mary explains what she needs, old Benjamin immediately recognizes her as someone who truly understands natural medicine. He has exactly the necessary plants and explains they were harvested during the appropriate moon by a community in rural Alabama. The price of the herbs is negligible compared to the millions Edward has already spent on treatments, but the real value lies in knowing how to use them correctly. Mary spends Sunday meticulously preparing the natural remedy in her kitchen, following exactly the instructions her grandmother taught her decades ago. She boils the roots in spring water, lets the leaves rest in infusion for exactly 6 hours, and mixes the flowers only at the final moment. The result is a golden-colored tea with a gentle aroma that brings memories of her childhood in the South. Mary knows she's risking her job and possibly her freedom by doing this, as she could be accused of practicing medicine illegally, but her conscience wouldn't allow her to stand by while a child dies. On Monday morning, Richard and Mary meet discreetly in the hospital parking lot before the start of the workday. He's visibly nervous, knowing he's risking his entire medical career by accepting an unconventional treatment. But something inside him, perhaps the memory of the idealistic doctor he once was, compels him to move forward. Mary gives him a small thermos with the prepared tea and detailed instructions on how to administer it. 1 tablespoon every 4 hours, always at room temperature, and never mixed with other medications. She warns that the first signs of improvement might take up to 12 hours to appear, but that after that, recovery should be quick and consistent. Richard's great dilemma is how to administer the treatment without Edward's knowledge. He decides to use his medical authority to excuse the nursing staff from applying some secondary medications at specific times, creating time windows where he himself can discreetly administer Mary's tea. During these applications, Richard observes Gabriel carefully, monitoring every vital sign and looking for any change in his condition. The first 8 hours are agonizing, with no apparent improvement, and Richard begins questioning whether he's made the biggest mistake of his career. The change begins subtly in the 9th hour after the first dose. Gabriel, who had been unconscious for 3 days, slightly moves the fingers of his right hand. Richard almost can't believe what he sees and discreetly calls a nurse to confirm the movement. In the 11th hour, Gabriel's fever drops for the first time in a week, going from 103.1 degrees Fahrenheit to 100.8 degrees Fahrenheit. In the 12th hour, the boy opens his eyes for the first time in 4 days and weakly murmurs, asking for water. Richard is in shock. In 20 years of medicine, he's never seen such rapid and apparently miraculous recovery. Edward, who was sleeping in the chair beside his son's bed after another sleepless night, wakes up to the sound of Gabriel's weak voice. When he sees his son conscious and speaking, he bursts into tears of relief and gratitude. He hugs Gabriel delicately, still fearing it might just be a temporary moment of lucidity before the final decline. Edward immediately calls all the doctors to check Gabriel's condition, and the tests show significant improvement in all indicators. Neurological function is normalizing, vital signs are stabilizing, and immune response is finally reacting appropriately. Dr. Richard finds himself in an extremely delicate position. He knows exactly what caused Gabriel's improvement, but cannot reveal the truth without exposing Mary and himself to serious legal and professional consequences. When Edward demands an explanation for the sudden recovery, Richard improvises a technical explanation about delayed immune response to the combined treatment protocol, using medical jargon complex enough to satisfy Edward's curiosity, without lying completely. Internally, Richard is undergoing a profound transformation. For the first time in years, he remembers why he chose medicine and feels a spark of the passion he thought he had lost forever. In the following 2 days, Gabriel continues improving consistently and remarkably. His fever disappears completely, he recovers his appetite, returns to playing and talking normally, and all tests show results within normal range. Edward is euphoric about his son's recovery, but also completely perplexed by the speed and completeness of the improvement. He persistently pressures Richard for detailed scientific explanations, wanting to understand exactly what medical protocol produced this miracle, so he can implement it in similar cases in his other hospitals. Mary Grace continues working silently in her cleaning duties, discreetly observing Edward's joy at Gabriel's recovery. She feels deep satisfaction knowing her ancestral knowledge saved a life, but also carries the sadness of not being able to share this joy openly. For her, the most important thing is that the child is alive and healthy, regardless of receiving recognition or not. Her grandmother always taught her that a person's true value isn't in the recognition they receive, but in the lives they manage to touch positively. The situation reaches its critical point when Edward, still seeking answers, decides to hire an international medical investigation team to study Gabriel's case and identify exactly what was the determining factor for his recovery. He wants to scientifically document the treatment to publish in prestigious medical journals and possibly patent some revolutionary protocol. Edward sees in Gabriel's recovery not only his son's salvation, but also a business opportunity that could revolutionize medicine and generate billions in profits. Dr. Richard realizes that the investigation will inevitably discover the use of unconventional treatment, and that both he and Mary will be in serious legal trouble. He spends several sleepless nights, torn between fear of consequences and the feeling that he finally did something truly meaningful as a doctor. The pressure is even greater because Gabriel continues completely healthy, definitively proving that Mary's treatment was effective. But this will only intensify the penalties if the truth is discovered. The moment of truth arrives when the investigation team, after meticulously analyzing all medical records and treatments applied to Gabriel, concludes that none of the official medications or procedures could have caused the observed recovery. They inform Edward that there must have been some undocumented external factor that was responsible for the cure. Edward becomes furious with this conclusion and demands that Richard immediately explain what unauthorized treatment was applied to his son. Cornered and with no way out, Richard decides it's time to confront his own moral failures and take responsibility for his actions. In a private meeting with Edward, he reveals the whole truth, How Mary Grace correctly identified Gabriel's condition. How she offered a solution based on ancestral knowledge. How he decided to try the natural treatment in desperation. And how this treatment was directly responsible for saving Gabriel's life. Richard takes full responsibility for the decision and offers to resign immediately from his position, knowing his medical career has probably come to an end. Edward is initially in a state of total shock. He cannot process the information that his janitor, a woman he always despised and considered ignorant, was the only person in the entire hospital capable of diagnosing and curing his son. The revelation fundamentally challenges his entire worldview about social class, formal education versus ancestral wisdom, and the true value of people. Edward goes through a profound existential crisis, questioning how many other valuable people he might have despised throughout his life due to his prejudices. Leave a comment telling which part moved you most so far, because what comes next will show you how a person can really change when they see the truth about themselves. After hours of solitary reflection, Edward makes a decision that surprises everyone, especially himself. Instead of firing Richard and Mary as would be expected from his previous character, he decides he needs to personally confront the woman who saved his son. Edward seeks Mary at her workstation, and for the first time in 15 years, really sees her as a human being with a name, history, and intrinsic value. He asks to speak with her privately, and Mary, knowing she'll probably be fired and possibly prosecuted, accepts with dignity. The meeting between Edward and Mary is one of the most tense and transformative moments in the entire story. Edward begins trying to maintain his authoritarian posture, questioning Mary about her training, her qualification to diagnose medical conditions, and her knowledge about medicinal plants. Mary responds with calm and honesty, explaining she never had formal education beyond 4th grade, but grew up learning from her grandmother about the healing power of plants. She tells about her childhood in Mississippi, about how her grandmother was respected throughout the region as a healer, and how this knowledge was passed orally through generations. As Mary speaks, Edward begins to perceive the depth of her knowledge and the richness of a cultural tradition he always completely ignored. Mary explains she didn't act out of pride or desire for recognition, but simply because she couldn't live with herself knowing she could have saved a child and didn't try. She says she understands if Edward wants to fire her or take legal action, but that she doesn't regret helping save Gabriel. It's in this moment that Edward's most profound transformation happens. Looking into Mary's sincere eyes, he sees reflected all his own arrogance, prejudice, and social blindness of recent years. He realizes he spent decades surrounded by people with expensive diplomas and impressive titles, but none of them managed to do what this humble woman did: save his son's life. Edward begins to cry, not tears of self-pity, but tears of shame for having been so unfair and blind for so long. In a gesture no one would expect from the old Edward Richardson, he kneels before Mary and asks sincere forgiveness for all the years of disrespect, invisibility, and humiliations. He acknowledges she possesses valuable knowledge that saved his son's life, knowledge he despised out of ignorance and prejudice. Edward asks Mary if she can forgive him and if she would be willing to help him become a better person, someone who can truly see and value people regardless of their social position. Mary, with the wisdom of someone who has suffered much in life but never lost the capacity to forgive, helps Edward stand up and says everyone deserves a second chance when they demonstrate genuine repentance. She explains she never held a grudge against him, as she understands people act according to what they learned in life, and that it's possible to change when there's real will to grow as a human being. From this moment on, Edward begins a journey of genuine redemption. He starts implementing immediate changes in the hospital, creates an active listening program where employees of all levels can contribute suggestions and knowledge, establishes fairer wages for all support staff, and institutes a recognition program that values contributions regardless of organizational hierarchy. Most importantly, Edward convinces Mary to lead a new, integrative medicine department at the hospital, where traditional knowledge and modern medicine work together. Dr. Richard also undergoes his own transformation. The experience of seeing the effectiveness of Mary's treatment reignited his passion for medicine and reminded him that healing isn't just about protocols and equipment, but about being open to learning from any source that can help patients. Richard becomes Mary's right-hand man in the new department, creating a bridge between her ancestral knowledge and modern scientific medicine. He returns to being the idealistic doctor he once was, but now with the wisdom and humility that come from experience. Gabriel recovers completely and develops a special relationship with Mary, whom he affectionately calls Grandma Mary. The child, with the natural innocence of childhood, never had his father's prejudices and always treated Mary with respect and affection. Now, with Edward's approval, Gabriel spends afternoons learning from Mary about plants and about the importance of respecting and valuing all people. Edward's transformation is evident in how he encourages this friendship and learns alongside his son. Mary Grace sees her life transformed in ways she never imagined possible. Besides having a decent salary that allows her to give a better life to her grandchildren, she's now respected and valued for her unique knowledge. Most important for Mary, however, is knowing she can use her gifts to help other people openly, without fear or shame. She trains other employees interested in learning about medicinal plants and creates a small therapeutic garden in the hospital grounds. The new integrative medicine department becomes a model for other hospitals, attracting national and international attention. Edward, who before saw everything only as profit opportunity, now genuinely takes pride in leading a revolution in how American medicine can integrate ancestral wisdom with modern technology. He becomes an active defender of valuing traditional knowledge and an example of how people can change when confronted with the truth about themselves. The story of Edward, Mary, and Gabriel spreads through the media as an inspiring example of human transformation, overcoming prejudice, and recognizing the value of all people. The hospital becomes a symbol of how work environments can be more just, inclusive, and effective when they truly value the diversity of knowledge and experiences each person brings. If this story touched your heart like it touched mine, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of these stories that remind us of the best that exists in humanity. Share with someone who needs to remember that all people have value, regardless of their position in life. Mary Grace continues living in her simple house in South Chicago, but now by personal choice. She could move to a richer neighborhood with her new salary, but prefers to remain in her community, where she can use her knowledge to help the neighbors who always supported her. Her house has become a small reference center in natural medicine, where people from all over the city come seeking guidance and alternative treatments. Edward discovers a happiness he had never experienced before, the satisfaction of making a positive difference in people's lives. He's still a successful businessman, but now his businesses are guided by values of social justice and community responsibility. Gabriel grows up seeing his father as an example that it's possible to recognize one's own mistakes and become a better person, a lesson that will positively shape his entire future life. The friendship between Edward and Mary becomes one of the most important relationships in both their lives. They meet regularly to talk about life, about the plants Mary grows, about the cases they attend at the hospital, and about how they continue learning from each other every day. Edward always says Mary didn't just save his son's life, but also saved his own soul from an empty life of prejudice and arrogance. Dr. Richard publishes a revolutionary scientific article about integration between traditional and modern medicine, using Gabriel's case as the central study. The article opens doors for serious academic research on Brazilian medicinal plants and helps scientifically legitimize knowledge that always existed in traditional communities. Richard becomes a respected voice in integrative medicine and an example of how professionals can evolve in their careers by embracing new forms of knowledge. The transformation at St. Michael's Hospital serves as a model for other health institutions throughout the country. Other hospitals begin implementing similar integrative medicine programs and valorization of traditional knowledge. Mary is frequently invited to give lectures and courses, sharing not only her knowledge about plants, but also her life philosophy based on humility, respect, and love for others. This story teaches us that a person's true value isn't in diplomas, titles, or bank accounts, but in the capacity to do good and the wisdom they carry with them. Mary Grace always knew this, but Edward needed to almost lose what he loved most to understand this fundamental truth. The humility to accept we can be wrong and the courage to change are characteristics that separate truly great people from those who simply occupy positions of power. The legacy of this transformation goes far beyond the walls of St. Michael's Hospital. Gabriel grows up becoming a young man conscious of the importance of social justice and respect for cultural differences. He studies medicine motivated not by the ambition to get rich, but by the genuine desire to heal and help people, carrying with him the teachings of both his redeemed father and his dear Grandma Mary. When he graduates as a doctor, Gabriel implements in his practice the perfect integration between modern science and ancestral wisdom, becoming a symbol of the new generation of professionals who truly value the complete human being. Mary Grace, at 60 years old, is officially recognized by Harvard Medical School with a title of honorary doctor in traditional medicine, an honor she receives with the same humility with which she always lived. In her acceptance speech, she dedicates the recognition to the memory of her grandmother and to all the women who, throughout history, preserved ancestral knowledge even when despised by formal society. Her words move the audience of doctors, professors, and students, reminding everyone that true wisdom is often found where we least expect to find it. Edward Richardson becomes one of the country's greatest philanthropists, using his fortune to create a network of community hospitals that offer free treatment integrating conventional and traditional medicine. He establishes scholarships for young people from disadvantaged communities interested in studying medicine, and creates a research fund dedicated exclusively to the scientific study of American medicinal plants. His transformation is so complete that he becomes known nationally no longer as the ruthless businessman of before, but as a tireless defender of social justice in healthcare. Dr. Richard assumes direction of an integrative medicine research institute that becomes a world reference in the field. He trains a new generation of doctors who learn from the beginning of their training to value different forms of knowledge and to treat each patient with the dignity every human being deserves. His career, which was morally bankrupt before, gains new purpose and meaning, proving it's never too late to rediscover our true vocation. Mary's 3 grandchildren, inspired by the transformation they saw in their grandmother's life, follow paths that honor the values she taught them. The oldest becomes a nurse and works in the hospital's integrative medicine department. The middle one studies biology, focusing on medicinal plants, and the youngest decides to be a teacher to teach children about respect, diversity, and the value of each person. The family that once struggled just to survive now has the opportunity to prosper and contribute positively to society. The therapeutic garden Mary created at the hospital expands and becomes a medicinal botanical garden open to the public, where people of all ages can learn about American healing plants and their responsible application. Medical students do mandatory internships in this garden, learning that healing goes far beyond prescribing industrialized medications. The place becomes a symbol of how tradition and modernity can coexist harmoniously when there's mutual respect and open mind. This true story reminds us that miracles happen every day around us, often through the hands of people society considers invisible. Mary Grace was always special, but it took a tragedy for her light to finally be seen and valued. How many other Marys exist around us, carrying precious knowledge, waiting only for someone to have the humility to listen to them. The most beautiful thing about this journey is realizing everyone came out transformed. Edward learned humility and found true purpose. Richard rediscovered his passion for medicine. Gabriel grew up in an environment of respect and justice, and Mary finally received the recognition she always deserved. But the greatest miracle wasn't Gabriel's cure. It was the healing of hearts hardened by prejudice, arrogance, and contempt for others. When we close our eyes to people's value due to their social position, skin color, education level, or profession, we lose the opportunity to learn, grow, and discover extraordinary human treasures. Mary Grace teaches us that true nobility lies in the capacity to serve others, that real intelligence lies in practical wisdom that improves lives, and that authentic wealth lies in relationships based on respect and genuine love. If you made it to the end of this story, it's because something in your heart recognizes the truth of these lessons. Share this message with people who need to remember that we all have value, that we all can change for the better, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected sources. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the best of humanity and remind us that, regardless of our position in life, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Mary Grace's life proves to us that it doesn't matter how humble our origin or how invisible we might seem to the world's eyes. When we carry love, knowledge, and willingness to help others, we have the power to transform lives and touch hearts in ways we never imagined. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all, that each of us, in our own way, carries a divine blessing waiting for the right opportunity to manifest and illuminate the world.